Hi, Alan Hadley with My Photo Networks. Thanks for joining me for this next video tutorial. Today we're going to continue our series with still life photography. Now we're going to be shooting glass today. As you can see here, we have a number of different types of glass and colored glass. What we're going to illustrate in this video tutorial is how to properly shoot glass and some tricks and techniques that you can use when doing so. Now, as always, let's keep in mind our 5 basics: light, subject, perspective, composition, and exposure. Throughout this tutorial, we're going to be talking about these 5 elements and how they affect still life photography and shooting glass. So with that said, let's get started. To get started, let's talk about the elements that we're going to be working with and shooting today. First, Nikon D5000 17 to 55 millimeter lens, 2.8 VR. We're using a white backdrop, simply a canvas, and that's going to help us with the luminance of the individual items. It's actually reflective, so it's going to bring light up into these individual items and create a greater level of contrast and a greater level of saturation. We're also working with a shoot-through diffuser in the background. I opted to use that for 2 reasons. One, it diffuses the light. It also gives us the ability to have a smooth background. And as you'll notice, we have windows in the background. So we wanted to make sure that we alleviated the possibility of being able to see those. The reason for that is because we're actually going to be shooting at a deeper f-stop. More than likely, it's going to be somewhere between 16 and 22. That's so our depth of field will carry across and through the subject and give us maximum depth of field. What I want to do at this point is kind of walk around the set here and kind of show you how I have things set up. Of course, you can see our elements that we're going to be shooting there. And I'm going to walk on around and just kind of pan around this a little bit and go a little wider here. And you can see our shoot-through reflector. Now, let me talk to you for a minute about this reflector. It's a simple construction build, which I have a video on the site that shows you how to build it. But as you can see, all it's simply doing is diffusing the light that's actually coming through. So if you look at the light that's here, okay, how bright it is, and then you look at my hand on this side, it actually diffuses the light quite well. And that's what we want. That's going to control our background and give us a nice, clean, white environment to shoot in. So, let's move on. Okay, we're set up on our first composition utilizing these individual elements. Now, understand that the choice or the photo design that you choose when shooting something like this is completely unlimited. There's so many different compositions and ways to shoot glass. What you want to focus on is the design of not only the elements that are present, but the way that you're setting up your perspective so that you illustrate that design. What we want to do is position these elements so that we get maximum light or maximum definition of the individual element. Now, there may be things that you find in the surface of an element that you're going to have to edit later, and we're not worried about that right now. What we're looking at more than anything, and I'm going to come into the shot here to show you, is we're going to be looking at this little curve that's right here. Okay, we're going to be looking at the detail of all of these little elements, the texture of the smoothness and lack of texture of this particular surface. We're also looking at the light spilling through here and the light coming through this little area here. So what we're paying attention to is how these 2 elements work together. You have something straight and something curved, and then of course you have this nice texture that's going on in this area. So with that said, let's shoot this and take a look at this finished image. Okay, now that you've had a chance to actually see that finished image, what I wanted to point out in this particular shot is something you have to be very, very aware of, and that is shutter speed and your f-stop. Now, on that last shot, our shutter speed was actually 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5 of a second at f/22 for maximum depth of field. What you want to pay attention to is this edge that's right here, and the edge is actually in the back part of this element and the back part of this element. the white light that's coming in from in behind there and spilling around this, if you overexpose this image to try to brighten this, what happens is you get light bleed. It actually burns around that edge and doesn't give you a good clean edge. So shutter speed in this particular situation is the key to making a successful image. Basically, pick the f-stop that's going to work for your depth of field, adjust your shutter speed to adjust your exposure. That way you get maximum depth of field and you alleviate any kind of light burn that you might get or bleed from that light coming in from behind. Okay, as you can tell, we're using our next two elements that are quite different than the first two, but we're setting our composition up very similar to the other. The whole point is that it's unlimited. You can do pretty much anything that you want. The principles are really pretty simple. It's all shutter speed and f-stop. Understand that shutter speed controls the light from behind and your f-stop controls your depth of field. So how you set your composition up at this point, at this perspective, is really quite simple. You can do any combination that you want. Now, let's take a look at some details in this shot. This round edge, all of this texture that's coming in here, and the shadows, as you can see, there's like little black areas and light areas. Those light areas are called speculars. And as you can see here, we have a break in color. It's lighter at the top than it is at the bottom. So what we're using are those elements as part of our photo design. Now, what I may end up doing is changing my perspective or my crop a little bit to get rid of this little triangle that's here. That kind of bothers me. You can raise your camera up to show more of it, or you can pull your lens in closer and get a tighter shot so that you get rid of it completely. What we're working with here is texture, light, and shadow, and we're also looking at the photo design of the elements. So let's shoot this and take a look at this finished image. Okay, in our next composition, you can notice that I have actually added a third item, and I'm actually shooting at a slight angle. Now, if you want to get really dramatic with something like this, make that angle even more forced. In other words, make it deeper. What I've chose to do is keep it rather shallow so my depth of field will carry from this point of the image all the way through this point of the image. And I want good detail throughout. Now, because we're actually shooting with a backlight type scenario, all of our colors are going to saturate: the yellow, the orange, and the blue. Now you can notice that there's some really good speculars going on, like right in this area where this is brighter, and that's actually our background that you're seeing. And then this little dark area is actually showing through this element into this element, which is clear, so there's still light passing through. We want to pay attention to all of these little details, make adjustments as needed, and then expose our image. Once again, this image is going to be exposed at 1/3 of a second, 1/4 of a second, and 1/5 of a second at f/22. So let's shoot this and look at this finished image. In this next shot, what we've done is actually add the other blue element into the whole scene. We've actually widened our scene a bit, where we're showing a little bit of foreground. We're also showing this top edge here and keeping it right on the edge. And then we're also showing this edge over here and keeping it right on the edge. The whole idea here is balance, how you're balancing these elements together. We've got all of this texture throughout and the lack of, and we're showing all the nice color. I'm keeping it actually at an angle, so our depth of field needs to carry from the very front to the very back. So maximum depth of field is required. Our exposure, once again, is 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5 of a second. Let's shoot this and look at the finished image. On our next image, what we're doing is changing our composition just a bit. We've actually changed our point of view or our perspective, and we've added the two different colors. We have the blue and then we have the orange. Now, as you can see, I have this pointing away from this. I want this texture that's actually working in this to work with this texture, and then of course our backlight is really showing the composition and showing the form and shape of the elements. The key here is exposure. as I've talked throughout this video, our exposure has been 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5 of a second. The reason I've chosen to go to that level of actual exposure is because I want the maximum depth of field, the f/22. The only way to get greater depth of field in this scenario is to back off your lens and do a wider shot to gain more depth of field. But at f/22, and being very specific about the angle of view that you're shooting at, you're going to be fine. Your depth of field is going to carry. So with that said, let's shoot this image and move to our next shot. Alright, we're set up on our next shot, and what I wanted to point out to you here is another type of photo design. Now what I've done is I've set these two up where they're setting up together, but then I've added the yellow to it as just an added element. So what we're going to do is we're going to shoot this image like this, and then we're going to remove this element to show just these two elements here. Now what we can do is actually bring this back in and set this back in here, and then focus on just this area. What I like about this is this yellow right here is actually reflecting down into this glass, which gives us a really nice contrast and adds something different to the image. But I like just this portion of it and just this portion of it over here. So maybe what we do is we crop in even closer or zoom in even closer to do a different type of shot. The whole point here is don't limit yourself to one specific area of the shot. Look at every aspect, because the best composition may just be right in front of you and you just don't see it. So let's shoot this and let's look at the finished images. That brings us to the end of this video tutorial. Keep it simple. Use simple props, simple materials, and focus on the things that are really important about your photography. Understand that to create great images, it's in most cases very simple elements that do so. So pay attention to those details, and I think you'll find that your photography will be much better. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial, and I look forward to our next.